That cold morning, no one expected an act of kindness to change everything. What started as another day on the road became a story the whole town tried to explain, and few had the courage to tell. Before we begin, subscribe and turn on the bell. Here we show that behind the engines and the leather, there are still human hearts. The rain had just let up, leaving the asphalt outside the roadside diner slick and shimmering under the pale dawn light. Steam rose from the grills of parked motorcycles, their chrome frames still warm from the night's ride. Jack's Harley wiped the condensation from his handlebars, his calloused hands moving with the quiet precision of someone who'd spent decades coaxing life from machines. At 48, Jax was a fixture among the Iron Riders, the brotherhood that rolled through these forgotten stretches of highway like shadows in the mist. His Harley, a beast he'd built piece by piece over 15 years, sat heavy and unassuming beside him, black paint chipped in places, the kind of wear that spoke of miles rather than vanity. Inside the diner, the air smelled of burnt coffee and sizzling bacon, the kind of place where truckers nursed hangovers and locals avoided eye contact. Jack slid into a booth by the window, his leather vest creaking against the vinyl seat. The patch on his back, the Iron Rider's emblem, a coiled serpent around a rusted chain, drew the usual glances, but he ignored them. He'd grown used to the whispers, the assumptions that painted him as trouble on two wheels. Truth was, Jax hadn't thrown a punch in anger for over a decade, not since the war had carved hollows under his eyes that no amount of road dust could fill. The waitress, a woman named Lena, with tired lines etched around her mouth, poured his coffee without a word. She'd seen his kind before, rough around the edges, but they tipped well and kept to themselves. "Rough night out there?" she asked, her voice soft, like she was testing the waters. Jax nodded, staring into the black liquid as if it held answers. "Just the usual," he murmured, his voice gravelly from the wind and silence. He thought of his daughter, Ellie, back in the small town they'd left behind. She was 12 now, fighting a battle with leukemia that no engine roar could outrun. The medical bills piled up like storm clouds, and the riders had been his anchor, pooling what they could from odd jobs and long hauls. But pride kept him from asking for more. He'd built that bike as a promise to her, a symbol that some things endured. The bell above the door jingled, shattering the morning's fragile peace. In strode a man who looked like he'd stepped out of a boardroom ad. Tailored suit, polished shoes clicking on the linoleum, a Rolex glinting under the fluorescent lights. Victor Lang, CEO of Apex Dynamics, the auto parts conglomerate that had swallowed up half the factories in the county. He was in town for a site visit, barking orders into his phone about quarterly projections, his voice slicing through the diner's hum like a cold blade. Victor scanned the room with the disdain of someone who owned the air he breathed, his eyes landing on Jax's booth. Then, through the window, on the Harley. Victor paused, phone still pressed to his ear, and let out a bark of laughter that turned heads. He ended the call and sauntered outside, gesturing at the bike with a manicured hand. "Hey, you!" he called, his tone dripping with mock curiosity. Jax looked up slowly, setting his mug down with deliberate care. The diner fell quiet, forks hovering mid-air. Lena hovered near the counter, her hand tightening on a dish rag. Victor circled the Harley like a critic appraising a flawed sculpture. "That bike is junk," he declared, loud enough for the parking lot to hear. "Look at it. Rust spots, mismatched parts. You call that a machine? I've got electric scooters in my garage worth more than this scrap heap." He kicked lightly at the tire, the thud echoing in the still air. Jax felt a familiar heat rise in his chest, the kind that had once led to bar fights and regrets. But he swallowed it down. The bike wasn't just metal, it was his life's work. A $2 million custom engine hidden beneath the weathered exterior, forged from rare alloys, hand-tuned pistons that purred like a hidden storm. He'd poured every saved penny into it, scavenging parts from junkyards and black market trades, all to prove to Ellie that dreams didn't rust. Rising from the booth, Jack stepped outside, the gravel crunching under his boots. Rainwater dripped from the diner's awning, pooling at their feet. Victor straightened, smirking, as if expecting a confrontation he could spin into a story for his colleagues. What, gonna defend your toy? Save it. Real power comes from innovation, not this. Nostalgia. His words hung heavy, laced with the arrogance of a man who'd never felt the road's unforgiving pull. Jax met his gaze, eyes steady as weathered steel. He didn't raise his voice. He never did anymore. Instead, he reached into his pocket for the keys, the metal cool against his palm. Junk, you say? His words were low, almost lost in the distant hum of an approaching truck. With a flick of his wrist, he straddled the seat, the leather saddle conforming to him like an old friend. Victor crossed his arms, chuckling to his reflection in the diner's window, where a few patrons now watched. Lena peered out, her face pale. Jax turned the key. For a heartbeat, silence reigned, the kind that amplified every drip of water, every held breath. Then, the engine caught. Not with a roar, but a deep, resonant growl that built like thunder rolling in from the horizon. The ground vibrated subtly, the air thickening with the scent of high-octane fuel and precision engineering. Pistons fired in perfect symphony, the custom V-twin exhaling a timbre that was pure, unadulterated power, smooth as silk, fierce as a caged lion. Dust stirred from the asphalt, and Victor's smirk faltered, his eyes widening as the bike idled without a hitch, its hidden heart revealing itself in ways no suit could comprehend. The CEO took a step back, the color draining from his face. Jax let the engine purr for a long moment, feeling the pulse of it sink with his own steady heartbeat. It wasn't about show. It was about the quiet truth beneath the surface, the kind of strength that didn't need to shout. He killed the ignition, the sudden silence louder than any rev. Junk doesn't sound like that, Jax said simply, dismounting. Victor stammered something about vintage relics, but his voice lacked conviction now, echoing hollowly. Back inside, the diner exhaled. Lena refilled Jax's coffee without asking, her hand brushing his shoulder in silent thanks. But as Jax sat, staring at the steam rising from his mug, a shadow crossed his thoughts. Victor wasn't done. Men like him never were. And in the Brotherhood's code, mocking one was mocking all. The rain began again, pattering softly against the window, washing away the morning's tension, but not the undercurrent of what was to come. Jax wondered if this chance encounter would drag him back into the fray he'd left behind, or if it would remind him why he rode at all, for protection, for the ones who needed it most. The rain picked up as Jax nursed his coffee, the drops tracing erratic paths down the diner's window like tears held too long. The steam from his mug blurred the world outside, but he could still see Victor Lang lingering by his sleek black SUV, phone back to his ear, gesturing animatedly as if recounting the exchange to some distant underling. Jax's fingers tightened around the ceramic handle, the warmth seeping into his skin a small anchor against the chill settling in his bones. He'd walked away clean, but the encounter gnawed at him. Not the mockery, but the casual cruelty in Victor's eyes. The way a man like that dismissed lives built from grit and grease. Lena slid a plate of eggs and toast in front of him, her movements efficient, but her gaze lingering. "You handled that better than most would," she said quietly, wiping her hands on her apron. There was a flicker of something in her expression. Gratitude, maybe, or recognition of the restraint it took. Jax nodded, forking into the food without appetite. "No point in feeding his fire," he replied, his voice low. But inside, the engine's rumble still echoed in his chest, a reminder of the fire he'd banked for years. The Harley wasn't just a machine. It was the sum of his sacrifices, every late-night weld and scavenged part a vow to Ellie. Hearing it dismissed as junk felt like a cut to that vow, reopening wounds he'd thought scarred over. The door jingled again, this time bringing in the low rumble of camaraderie. 3 iron riders pulled up outside, their bikes forming a loose semicircle around Jax's. First was Marco, the wiry veteran with a salt and pepper beard and eyes that had seen too many desert sunsets. He'd ridden with Jax since the early days, back when the Brotherhood was just a handful of guys sharing smokes and stories around a campfire. Beside him, Thomas, younger and broader, with tattoos snaking up his arms like rivers of ink, killed his engine with a practiced twist. And trailing them was Riley, the quiet one, her presence a steadying force among the men, former mechanic turned rider, with a scar across her cheek from a crash that had tested the group's loyalty. They filed in, shaking off the rain like dogs, their boots leaving muddy prints on the linoleum. Marco clapped Jax on the shoulder as he slid into the booth opposite. "Heard the tail end of that circus," he said, his voice a gravelly drawl. "Suit's got a mouth bigger than his wallet." Thomas grunted in agreement, scanning the menu with feigned interest, while Riley took the seat next to Jax, her leather jacket still damp and smelling faintly of oil and wet earth. She didn't say much at first, just poured sugar into her coffee and stirred slowly, the spoon clinking like a metronome. Jax recounted the exchange in clipped words, omitting the deeper sting. The riders listened without interruption, their faces a mosaic of quiet anger. Marco's jaw set, Thomas's fists clenching under the table, Riley's eyes narrowing as she glanced out at Victor's SUV. "Idiot doesn't know what he's looking at," Thomas muttered finally, his accent thick from years on the border runs. "That engine of yours could outrun anything he's got in his fleet." Jax shrugged, but the validation eased something in him. The Iron Riders weren't about flash. They were the unseen hands that fixed what the world broke, delivering parts to stranded families, standing watch over grief-stricken funerals. To them, the bike was more than Jax's pride. It was a testament to endurance, much like the group itself. Outside, Victor finally climbed into his vehicle, the engine purring to life with sterile efficiency. No soul, just calculated hum. But as he pulled away, tires hissing on the wet pavement, he slowed deliberately past the cluster of bikes, his window down just enough to toss a final barb. "Keep playing with your toys, boys. Real men build empires." The words carried on the rain-scented breeze, landing like salt in an open wound. Marco started to rise, but Jax's hand on his arm stilled him. "Let it go," Jax said, though his own pulse thrummed with the effort. Riley watched Victor's taillights fade into the gray, her expression unreadable. "Empires crumble," she murmured. "Toys like that? They carry you through the storm." The group ordered, burgers for the men, a simple salad for Riley, and the conversation shifted to the road ahead. They were en route to a small town upstate, where a fellow rider's sister needed help moving after her husband's passing. It was the kind of quiet mission that defined them. No fanfare, just showing up when the world turned its back. Jax thought of Ellie again, her last letter tucked in his saddlebag, her handwriting shaky but fierce. "Dad, when you fix that bike, fix us too." The words haunted him, a moral tether pulling him from the edge of retaliation. Starting the engine had been defiance, but chasing Victor down would be surrender to the rage that had cost him his marriage, his place in the civilian world. As they ate, the diner filled with the soft patter of rain and the murmur of other patrons stealing glances. Lena moved between tables, her smile a touch brighter now, as if the rider's presence had fortified the space against the morning's intrusion. But Jax caught the tremor in her hand as she cleared a neighboring booth, a single mother with a toddler in tow, the child's cough rattling like loose gravel. Lena's eyes met Jax's briefly, a silent plea in the exhaustion there. She'd mentioned once, in a rare moment of vulnerability, that her own kid was sick, treatments eating away at her savings. The parallel hit Jax like a cold gust. He slipped an extra 20 under his plate when she wasn't looking. They stepped out into the downpour as the sky darkened further, engines coughing to life one by one. Jax's Harley responded instantly, that deep growl vibrating through him like a shared heartbeat. The riders formed up, a loose convoy cutting through the mist, leaving the diner behind. But as they merged onto the highway, Jax glanced in his mirror, spotting a black SUV trailing at a distance. Victor's, unmistakable in its polished arrogance. The CEO wasn't done. Perhaps he'd followed out of curiosity or spite. Jax's grip tightened on the handlebars, the rain stinging his face. The road stretched ahead, slick and unforgiving, mirroring the choices piling up in his mind. Protect what mattered, or let the mockery fester into something uglier. The Brotherhood rode on, engines humming in unity, but the shadow of confrontation loomed, testing the quiet code that bound them. For the first time in years, Jax felt the pull of the old life, the one where justice came not from engines, but from fists and forgotten loyalties. The highway unfurled like a gray ribbon under the relentless rain, the wipers on Jax's helmet visor slicing through the blur as he led the pack. The Iron Riders rode in tight formation, engines thrumming in a low chorus that drowned out the storm's fury, but not the unease coiling in his gut. Marco flanked his left, Thomas to the right, Riley bringing up the rear, each bike an extension of their bond, forged in the fires of shared roads and sharper losses. The black SUV lingered in the rear view, a sleek predator keeping pace at a calculated distance, its headlights cutting through the mist like accusatory eyes. Jax's knuckles whitened on the grips, the vibration of the Harley traveling up his arms, syncing with the pulse of old instincts he thought he'd buried. Miles blurred into a monotonous rhythm, the scent of wet asphalt and exhaust filling his senses. Jax's mind wandered to Ellie, her face pale against the hospital pillow in the photo he kept in his wallet, smiling through the chemo fog, her small hand clutching a toy motorcycle he'd carved from scrap wood. "Make it roar for me, Dad," she'd whispered during his last visit, her voice fragile as cracked glass. The bills had mounted, a mountain no single ride could climb, but the riders had chipped in quietly. Marco selling a watch from his army days, Tomas skipping a payday to cover a treatment. It was their way. No debts, just loyalty etched in grease and silence. Yet Victor's mockery echoed like a taunt to that fragility, reducing Jax's lifeline to junk, as if the engine's hidden worth meant nothing against a stranger's sneer. The convoy crested a hill, the landscape opening to fields lashed by wind, skeletal trees bending like weary sentinels. Up ahead, a faded sign marked the turnoff to Willow Creek, the town where they were headed. A speck on the map, home to the rider's sister Maria, whose husband had gone down in a factory accident blamed on Apex Dynamics cost-cutting. Victor's company. The realization hit Jax like a skid on black ice. He'd known of the case vaguely, whispers around the campfire about faulty parts and denied claims. Now, with the SUV trailing, it felt like fate's cruel knot tightening. He signaled a slowdown, pulling onto the shoulder where gravel gave way to mud, the bikes settling with soft sighs as engines idled down. The riders dismounted, rain sheeting off their jackets as they formed a loose circle, faces shadowed under hoods. "That suit's still on us," Tomas said, jerking his thumb back. His breath fogged the air, eyes scanning the horizon where the SUV had eased to the roadside a quarter-mile back. Marco lit a cigarette, the flame flickering like a brief defiance, and passed it to Jax. "Thinks he's hunting," Marco growled, smoke curling from his lips. "But we don't play his games." Riley crouched by her bike, checking the chain with methodical pulls, her scar pulling tight as she frowned. "Could be coincidence," she said, though her tone carried doubt. "Or he's sniffing for trouble. Apex has been buying up land around here, pushing folks out." Jax exhaled smoke into the downpour, the burn in his lungs grounding him. The moral weight pressed in. Ignore the tale. Focus on Maria's move. Keep the peace for Ellie's sake. But the Brotherhood's code whispered otherwise. Protect your own. Stand for the overlooked. Victor's SUV crept closer now, stopping 50 yards off, its driver door opening to reveal the CEO stepping out, umbrella in hand like a shield of entitlement. He approached with measured steps, suit jacket buttoned against the chill, his face a mask of feigned concern. "Trouble with the junker?" He called over the rain, voice carrying that same oily confidence. The riders tensed, Marco's hand drifting to his belt, but Jack stepped forward, rain dripping from his brow. "No trouble," Jax replied evenly, meeting Victor's gaze. Water pooled at their boots, mixing dirt into rivulets that snaked toward the ditch. Up close, Victor's polish cracked, lines of stress around his eyes, the Rolex fogged from the damp. "Just heading to help a friend." Victor's laugh was sharp, cutting through the patter. "Friend? In this weather? Must be desperate. Look, I didn't mean to ruffle feathers back there. But seriously, that bike, it's a relic. My company's revolutionizing transport. Electric. Efficient. Yours? It's holding you back." He gestured vaguely at the Harleys, as if appraising livestock. Thomas shifted, a low rumble escaping him. But Riley's hand on his arm held him steady. Jax felt the engine's ghost hum in his veins. The $2 million heart he'd built from wartime scraps and midnight vigils. A machine that could outpace Victor's dreams, yet symbolized everything the CEO dismissed. Endurance over excess. "Efficiency doesn't fix what's broken," Jax said quietly, the words laced with the weight of Maria's loss. Ellie's fight. Victor's umbrella tilted, rain sluicing off, and for a flicker, uncertainty crossed his features. Broken? Like that factory mishap up the road? Tragic, but progress demands sacrifices. The admission hung there, a spark to dry tinder. Marco's cigarette dropped, sizzling in a puddle. Jax's chest tightened, the rain masking the heat rising. Not rage, but a protective fury for the margins Victor trampled. Before he could respond, Victor's phone buzzed, pulling his attention. He glanced at it, then back, his smirk returning. "Anyway, safe travels. Wouldn't want your toys to break down." He turned, retreating to his SUV, but not before Jax caught the glint in his eye. Calculation, not closure. As the vehicle pulled away, accelerating toward Willow Creek, the riders remounted in silence. Jax's mind raced. Victor knew the town, the accident. Was this chance, or a thread to something deeper? The convoy reformed, engines roaring back to life, the growl a collective resolve. Rain lashed harder, blurring the lines between pursuit and purpose. Jax throttled forward, the road demanding a choice, to confront the shadow, or let loyalty carve its own path through the storm. Behind the roar, he heard Ellie's voice again, urging him onward, toward the quiet strength that defined them all. "Comment where you're watching from. I want to know how far these stories of courage and loyalty can travel." The tires hummed over the rain-slicked blacktop as the convoy descended into Willow Creek, the town's edges fraying like an old map under the persistent downpour. Jax led the way, his Harley's frame cutting through the mist, each rev a steady pulse against the storm's chaos. The fields gave way to weathered clapboard houses and boarded-up storefronts, relics of better days before factories shuttered and jobs evaporated like morning fog. Smoke curled from chimneys, faint beacons in the gray, and the air carried the earthy tang of soaked soil, mixed with the faint bitterness of pine from the encroaching woods. Jax's jaw ached from clenching, the cold seeping through his gloves, but it was the knot in his chest that truly chilled him. Victor's words lingering like exhaust fumes, tying the CEO to Maria's grief in ways that felt too deliberate to ignore. They pulled into the gravel lot of a modest ranch house on the town's outskirts, the kind of place where porches sagged under the weight of unspoken sorrows. Maria's home, marked by a faded Iron Rider sticker on the mailbox, stood quiet, its windows dimmed by drawn curtains. Engines idled down to whispers, the sudden hush amplifying the rain's relentless tattoo on metal roofs. The riders dismounted, boots sinking into the mud, and Jax paused to scan the road behind them. No black SUV in sight, but the absence felt like a held breath, waiting to exhale. Marco slung a duffel from his saddlebag, tools and tarps for the move, while Thomas stretched his broad shoulders, rain dripping from his beard. Riley lingered by her bike, wiping down the handlebars with a rag, her movements precise, almost meditative, as if grounding herself against the unease. Maria opened the door before they knocked, her face gaunt under a loose ponytail, eyes red-rimmed but steady. She was in her mid-40s, with the same quiet resilience Jax recognized in Ellie, carrying loss like a hidden scar. "You came," she said simply, stepping aside to let them in, her voice thick with the effort of holding steady. The house smelled of stale coffee and cardboard boxes, half-packed relics of a life upended. Photo frames stacked on the kitchen table, a child's drawing taped to the fridge curling at the edges. Her husband, Raoul, had been gone 6 months, crushed in the Apex plant collapse. Official report called it equipment failure, but whispers among the workers pointed to subpar parts, corners cut for profit. Maria's hands trembled as she poured water into mugs, steam rising like ghosts from the kettle. They worked in companionable silence at first, hauling furniture to a rented truck, the rain pattering on the tin roof like distant applause. Jax lifted a heavy oak dresser alone, muscles straining under the weight, sweat mixing with rainwater on his brow. Each thud of boxes echoed Raoul's absence, and Maria's occasional glance carried a gratitude that pierced deeper than words. "He'd have appreciated this," she murmured during a break, handing Jax a damp towel. Her fingers brushed his, cool and fragile, and he saw the flicker of memory in her eyes, the way she'd met Raoul at a writer's rally, drawn to his gentle laugh amid the roar. Jax nodded, throat tight, thinking of Ellie's hospital bed, the way her hand felt too small in his during those long nights. "We look out for our own," he said, the words a vow more than reassurance. Outside, the storm eased to a drizzle, the sky lightening to a bruised purple as afternoon crept in. Tomas and Marco secured the load under tarps, their banter low and laced with old jokes about Raoul's infamous poker face, a small ritual to honor him. Riley helped Maria sort through a box of keepsakes, her voice soft as she suggested what to keep, what to let go. But Jax stepped onto the porch for air, the wooden boards creaking under his weight. And that's when he saw it. The black SUV idling at the end of the block, partially obscured by a row of overgrown hedges. Victor leaned against the hood, umbrella folded now, talking to a man in a hard hat who gestured toward the house. The sight twisted something in Jax's gut. This wasn't coincidence. Apex was circling, perhaps pressuring Maria to sell the land her family had held for generations, turning tragedy into transaction. He descended the steps quietly, gravel crunching softly, and approached the edge of the yard where shadows pooled. The conversation carried on the damp breeze, Victor's voice smooth, persuasive. "Mrs. Harlan's situation is unfortunate, but the offer stands. We can make this transition easier." The hard hat nodded, but his eyes darted uneasily. Jax's hand flexed at his side, the moral line blurring. Walk away. Let Maria handle her fight, or step in and risk pulling the riders into a storm they couldn't outride. The Brotherhood's code thrummed in him. Protect the vulnerable, stand where the suits wouldn't. But Ellie's face flashed, a reminder that escalation could cost more than pride. Victor spotted him then, straightening with that familiar smirk, dismissing the worker with a wave. Harlan, right. Small world. Just checking on a property assessment. His tone was casual, but his eyes appraised Jax like an obstacle, the Rolex catching a stray beam of light. Raindrops beaded on the SUV's roof, sliding down in slow trails. Jax stopped a few feet away, water dripping from his vest, the scent of wet leather sharp in the air. Assessment or pressure? His words came low, steady, the engine's earlier growl echoing unspoken in his stance. Victor chuckled, but it rang hollow, his gaze flicking to the house where Maria's silhouette moved behind the curtain. Business, my friend. Progress. You wouldn't understand. Stuck in the past with that. Contraption of yours. The barb landed, but Jax felt it glance off, tempered by the day's labor and Maria's quiet thanks. He took a step closer, the mud sucking at his boots, and for a moment, silence stretched, broken only by the distant call of a crow. Past has a way of catching up, Jax said, his voice even, eyes locking on Victor's. The CEO shifted, umbrella tapping against his leg, a small tell of discomfort. Then, from the porch, Riley appeared, her presence a silent reinforcement. Thomas and Marco framing the doorway like sentinels. Victor's smirk faded, the weight of their unity pressing in without a word. He cleared his throat, glancing at his watch. Time's money. Tell Mrs. Harlan the offer expires soon. He slid into the SUV, the door clicking shut with finality, engine humming to life as he drove off, tires spraying mist. Back inside, the riders gathered around the kitchen table, Maria pouring fresh coffee, her hands steadier now. Saw him from the window, she said softly. No accusation, just weariness. Marco's fist rested on the wood, knuckles whitening briefly before relaxing. We got your back, he rumbled, and the others nodded, a pact sealed in glances and shared sips. Jack stared into his mug, the steam blurring his reflection, feeling the shift within, the isolation of the road giving way to the warmth of purpose. But as dusk fell, painting the room in soft shadows, he wondered if Victor's retreat was retreat at all, or the calm before a reckoning that would test not just the bikes, but the hearts that rode them. The rain had stopped, leaving the world washed clean, yet the air hummed with the promise of storms yet to break. Dusk settled over Willow Creek like a heavy blanket, the sky bruising into deep indigos and purples, streaked with the last fading light. The ranch house glowed faintly from within, a solitary warmth against the encroaching chill, as the iron riders finished loading the final boxes into the truck. Jax wiped mud from his hands on a rag, the fabric already stiff with grime, and leaned against the porch railing, his breath visible in the cooling air. The scent of damp earth lingered, mingled with the faint, acrid tang of exhaust from the idling engines. Maria stood in the doorway, arms crossed over her chest, watching the group with eyes that held a mix of relief and lingering fear. I don't know what I'd do without you all, she said, her voice barely above the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze. Jax met her gaze, seeing echoes of his own quiet battles there, the way loss carved paths too deep to fill. Marco secured the tarp with bungee cords, his movements deliberate, each snap echoing like a punctuation to the day's unspoken tensions. Thomas paced the gravel drive, his broad frame casting long shadows, while Riley checked the truck's tires, her fingers tracing the treads as if reading the road's secrets. The confrontation with Victor had left a residue, a low hum of unresolved energy that vibrated through them all. Jax felt it in his chest, a contained storm, the kind that had once driven him to rash choices after the war. Nights blurred by bar lights and regrets. But now, with Ellie's letters weighing on his mind, he chose the harder path. Restraint, laced with the compassion that bound the riders tighter than any chain. Inside, they gathered around the scarred oak table for a simple meal. Canned soup warmed on the stove, bread from Maria's pantry, the steam carrying hints of herbs and memory. The room felt smaller with the furniture gone, walls echoing slightly with their low voices. Maria sat at the head, her hands wrapped around a mug, knuckles pale. Raoul always said the riders were family, she began, her words measured, as if testing fragile ground. Not blood, but the kind that shows up. Thomas nodded, spooning soup without looking up, his silence a form of agreement. Riley added a quiet, "He was right. her scar catching the lamplight, a reminder of her own scars earned in loyalty. Jax listened, the warmth of the bowl seeping into his palms, but his thoughts drifted to the black SUV's taillights, vanishing into the twilight. Victor's words, "Progress demands sacrifices," replayed like a looped tape, each iteration sharpening the edge of moral conflict. Was it right to let a man like that circle vultures over Maria's grief, turning her home into collateral? The Brotherhood's code urged action, a silent justice beyond badges and bylaws, but Jax's evolution pulled him toward caution, for Ellie's sake, for the fragile peace he'd rebuilt on the road. He set his spoon down, the clink drawing eyes. "What does Apex want with this land?" he asked Maria, his voice steady, probing without pressure. She sighed, tracing a finger along the mug's rim, the ceramic cool against her skin. "They've been buying up everything since the accident. Say it's for expansion. A new plant, safer this time. But Raoul's friends at the factory, they whisper it's to bury the truth. Faulty parts, inspections skipped. If I sell, the lawsuit dies quiet." Her eyes welled, but she blinked it back, a single tear tracing down her cheek like rain on glass. Marco's jaw tightened, his hand pausing mid-reach for bread. "Suits like that don't build. They break," he muttered, the words heavy with his own history. Veteran benefits denied, a brother lost to similar corporate neglect. Riley leaned forward, her voice soft but firm. "You've got proof." "Documents." Maria nodded, rising to retrieve a shoebox from a shelf, dust motes dancing in the low light as she set it down. Inside lay papers yellowed with age, emails, inspection reports, Raoul's handwritten notes on part numbers that matched Apex's inventory. Jax sifted through them, the paper crinkling under his calloused fingers, each page a testament to overlooked lives. One report caught his eye, a signature at the bottom, Victor Lang's, authorizing cost reductions that led to the collapse. The revelation settled like lead in his gut, redefining the morning's mockery, not just personal slight, but a thread to deeper rot. Victor wasn't a random antagonist. He was the architect of fractures in families like Maria's, like his own. The door rattled suddenly, a sharp knock cutting through the hush. They froze, spoons hovering, the air thickening with anticipation. Thomas rose first, his frame filling the doorway as he peered out into the night. Floodlights from a county cruiser painted the porch in stark white. 2 deputies standing there, rain jackets glistening under the drizzle that had returned. "Evening, folks," the lead deputy said, his tone neutral but eyes scanning the bikes lined up like guardians. "Got a call about suspicious activity, loitering, possible threats on a property dispute." Maria's face paled, her hand flying to her mouth, stifling a gasp. Jack stood slowly, the chair scraping like a warning, his mind racing to Victor's parting glance, the calculation in it now clear as a calculated strike. The deputy stepped inside at Maria's invitation, boots tracking mud, the scent of wet wool invading the space. "Ma'am, Mr. Lang from Apex reported concerns. Said he saw a group here, possibly intimidating you over the sale." The words landed like accusations, the second deputy eyeing the Iron Rider's patches with thinly veiled suspicion. Marco's fists clenched under the table, but Riley's subtle shake of her head kept him seated. Jack stepped forward, his presence calm, voice even. "We're helping a friend move. Family." He gestured to the empty rooms, the boxes stacked like evidence of transition. The lead deputy nodded, but his partner lingered by the table, glancing at the shoebox. "Mind if we take a look? Just protocol." Maria hesitated, her trembling hand hovering, but Jax caught her eye. A silent nod of solidarity. She pushed the box forward slightly. "It's all there. The truth about what happened to Raoul." The deputies leafed through, brows furrowing as details emerged, the room silent save for the rustle of paper and the distant hum of engines cooling outside. Minutes stretched, tension coiling like a spring, Jax's heart pounding a steady rhythm against the storm of implications. If Victor had sicked the law, this was escalation, retaliation wrapped in legality, testing the writer's resolve. Finally, the lead deputy closed the box, his expression shifting from routine to something akin to unease. This warrants a look upstairs. We'll follow up with the DA. They left with nods, cruiser lights flashing blue and red into the night, casting erratic shadows across the walls. The door shut, and silence fell, broken only by Maria's soft exhale, tears now freely tracing her face. "He won't stop," she whispered, collapsing into a chair. Jax knelt beside her, his hand on her shoulder. A small gesture, warm against the chill, awakening the compassion that had drawn him to the writers long ago. "Neither will we," he said quietly, the words a bridge from isolation to collective strength. Outside, the group gathered under the porch light, rain misting their faces. Tomas kicked at a pebble, frustration etching his features. "We ride after him. End this now?" Marco pondered, lighting a cigarette, the flame a brief flare in the dark. Riley shook her head, raindrops beating on her lashes. "Not like that. Smart. We protect what's ours without becoming what they fear." Jack stared into the woods, where the road twisted away, Victor's shadow looming larger. The moral turn pressed in. Confront with fury, or with the quiet justice of truth. His hand rested on the Harley's key in his pocket, the metal a talisman. The night deepened, engines waiting to roar, as the Brotherhood's loyalty hummed beneath the surface, contained rage yielding to the deeper call of redemption, one careful choice at a time. The night air hung thick with the scent of wet pine and cooling engines, the porch light casting elongated shadows that danced like uneasy specters across the gravel. Jack stood with the others, his boots planted firm in the mud, the chill seeping through his jeans as the drizzle picked up again. Maria's sobs echoed faintly from inside, muffled by the door she'd closed behind her, seeking a moment's solitude in the hollowed-out house. Tomas's question lingered unanswered for a beat, his breath fogging the space between them, eyes burning with the kind of fire that had once led to hasty rides and hospital visits. Marco drew deep on his cigarette, the ember glowing like a distant warning, while Riley's gaze fixed on the road, where the deputy's taillights had long vanished into the curving blacktop. Jax's hand lingered on the key in his pocket, the metal's edges biting into his palm, a tactile reminder of the power he'd built, not just in steel and pistons, but in the choices that defined him now. "We don't chase shadows," he said finally, his voice low, cutting through the patter of rain like a steady rumble. "Not tonight. We get Maria settled first, then we dig deeper." The words carried the weight of his internal war, the pull toward confrontation, fists clenched against Victor's smug entitlement, warring with the compassion that had kept him riding straight these years. Ellie's face flickered in his mind, her frail smile during their last call, urging him to fix things without breaking more. He couldn't drag the riders into a brawl that might land them in cuffs, far from her bedside. Marco nodded, flicking the butt into a puddle where it hissed out. Smart play. But if that suit shows again... He trailed off, the implication hanging heavy, shared in the Brotherhood's unspoken lexicon. Riley straightened, wiping rain from her face, her scar a pale line in the dim light. "We've got the papers. That's leverage. I know a guy in the next county, old contact from the shop days. He can verify those reports, make 'em stick." Her tone was pragmatic, a mechanic's precision applied to justice, diffusing Tomas's restlessness. The younger rider exhaled sharply, shoulders slumping as he leaned against the truck. "Fine, but I don't like leaving her exposed." They all glanced back at the house, where a single lamp glowed through the curtain, Maria's silhouette a quiet testament to their purpose. They moved with purpose then, the group dividing tasks in the efficient rhythm born of countless roadside fixes. Jax and Marco checked the truck's hitch, the chain clinking softly as they secured it to Riley's bike for towing. Tomas gathered the last of the tools, his movements forceful, each clang a release of pent-up energy. Inside, Jax found Maria folding a worn blanket, her eyes dry now but shadowed with exhaustion. She looked up, managing a faint smile that didn't reach her lips. "You don't have to stay the night," she said, though her voice pleaded otherwise. Jax shook his head, folding the blanket with her, the wool soft against his rough hands. "We're not going anywhere till dawn. Get some rest." In that small act, shared labor in the dim kitchen, the isolation he'd carried since the war began to crack, compassion seeping in like light through boarded windows. As midnight approached, they settled into watches. Thomas on the porch, rifle from the truck cab propped nearby, not for show, but a veteran's habit against the unknown. Marco and Riley took the living room, poring over the shoebox by flashlight, cross-referencing dates and signatures. Jax volunteered for the yard, pacing the perimeter under the eaves, the rain a constant whisper on his hood. The world felt smaller here, Willow Creek's quiet streets a fragile bubble against the broader storm of Victor's influence. His thoughts turned inward, replaying the day's threads. The diner's confrontation, the highway tale, the documents linking Apex to Raoul's death. It wasn't just mockery anymore. It was a pattern of disregard, suits like Victor trampling the margins where people like Maria and Ellie fought to hold on. The moral suspense tightened in his chest. Act now, risk everything, or wait and let the truth erode like rust. A low rumble shattered the night's hush, the distinct purr of an approaching engine. Not the deputy's cruiser, but something smoother, more predatory. Jax froze, hand dropping to his belt as headlights pierced the mist, sweeping across the yard like searching fingers. The black SUV rolled to a stop at the curb, engine idling with that sterile hum, Victor emerging once more, this time alone, his coat collar turned up against the wet. He carried no umbrella, rain matting his hair, giving him an uncharacteristic vulnerability. Or was it calculation? Jax stepped from the shadows, his presence drawing the others. Thomas at the door, Marco and Riley flanking the windows, their silhouettes a united front. "Harlan," Victor called, voice carrying over the drizzle, laced with feigned weariness. "We need to talk, alone." He stopped at the edge of the light, hands visible, empty, a gesture of truce that rang false. Jax's pulse quickened, the contained rage simmering beneath his calm exterior. "Nothing to say that the law hasn't heard," he replied, advancing slowly, boots squelching in the grass. Up close, Victor's face was drawn, the earlier smirk replaced by a tightness around his mouth, eyes darting to the house. "You think those papers scare me? Apex is untouchable. But I'm offering a way out. For her." He nodded toward Maria's window. "Double the buyout. Cash. Walk away clean." The offer hung there, temptation wrapped in threat, testing Jax's resolve. Thomas growled from the porch, but Jax raised a hand, holding the line. Rain traced cold paths down his neck, mirroring the chill of betrayal in Victor's words. "Clean? Like Raoul's death? Like the families you buried under reports?" His voice stayed even, but the emotion bled through, a father's quiet fury for the overlooked. Victor shifted, water pooling at his feet, and for the first time, a crack appeared. Not defiance, but a flicker of something human, guilt. It was business. Sacrifices for the greater good. You ride around playing heroes, but you're relics. Join the future, or get left in the dust. The words ignited the spark Jax had banked all day. He closed the distance, stopping inches away, the scent of Victor's expensive cologne clashing with the earthy rain. Heroes. We're the ones who show up when empires fail. Behind him, the riders emerged fully, a wall of leather and loyalty, their silence more potent than shouts. Victor's eyes widened, the umbrella-less exposure leaving him diminished, rain blurring his vision. He backed toward the SUV, stammering, "This isn't over. You'll regret." But Jax cut him off with a steady stare, the moral turn crystallizing. Protection through presence, not pursuit. Victor retreated, engine roaring to life as he sped away, taillights swallowed by the dark. The group exhaled collectively, tension uncoiling like a released spring. Back inside, Maria joined them, her presence a quiet anchor. "What now?" she whispered, hand on Jax's arm. He looked at his brothers and sister in arms, the warmth of the room a balm against the night. "We ride together, truth first." As the clock ticked toward dawn, Jax felt the shift deepen, from solitary rider to pillar of the pack. Redemption not in vengeance, but in the unbreakable hum of loyalty that no storm could silence. If this story already has your heart, hit the like button. It helps the story of Jax Harlan reach more people who still believe in humanity. Dawn crept over Willow Creek like a reluctant witness, painting the sky in muted grays and golds that filtered through the pines, casting long shadows across the dew-kissed gravel. Jax hadn't slept, his body slumped in a creaky armchair by the living room window, the night's vigil etching deeper lines into his face. The scent of stale coffee lingered in the air, mingling with the faint mustiness of unpacked boxes stacked like silent sentinels. Outside, the Iron Riders stirred to life. Engines coughing softly in the chill morning mist, Marco testing the truck's brakes with a low groan of metal on metal. Maria moved about the kitchen in hushed steps, brewing a fresh pot, her hands steadier now, but her eyes carrying the weight of the night's revelations. Jax watched her through the doorway, the steam rising from the percolator like exhaled worries, and felt the pull of shared burdens tightening the knot in his chest. He rose, joints protesting the awkward hours, and stepped onto the porch where Tomas nursed a thermos, his broad frame silhouetted against the rising light. "Quiet night after that," Tomas murmured, passing the steaming metal. Jax took a sip, the bitterness grounding him, chasing away the fog of fatigue. "Too quiet," he replied, his voice gravelly from disuse. The black SUV's absence felt like a paused breath. Victor's retreat not surrender, but strategy. A man like that didn't fold. He maneuvered. Riley emerged from the truck cab, wiping grease from her fingers on a rag, her expression alert, scar pulling tight in the cool air. Checked the roads at first light. No sign, but Apex trucks rolled through town an hour ago, hauling equipment toward the old plant site. Marco joined them, zipping his jacket against the damp, his salt and pepper beard beaded with mist. "They're pushing. Maria's lands the last piece." Inside, they gathered for a hasty breakfast, crackers and cheese from Maria's sparse pantry, the crackers crunching under teeth like brittle resolve. She sat at the table's edge, the shoebox of documents open before her, papers fanned out like fallen leaves. "I called the DA's office at sunrise," she said softly, her voice gaining a thread of steel. "Left a message with what we have. But Victor, he knows people." Her fingers traced Raoul's handwriting on a faded memo, the ink slightly smudged, a gesture that spoke of mornings lost to factory shifts and evenings cut short by accident. Jax reached across, covering her hand with his own, calloused palm warm against her cool skin. A small bridge of solidarity that eased the tremor in her touch. In that moment, the isolation he'd armored himself with since Ellie's diagnosis cracked further. Compassion wasn't a weakness, but the engine driving him forward, syncing with the Brotherhood's quiet hum. The moral tension coiled tighter as they planned the move. Willow Creek's main street lay just beyond the yard, a ribbon of cracked asphalt lined with faded awnings and pickup trucks idling at the single stoplight. "We convoy her to the new place upstate," Jax decided, his tone measured, eyes meeting each rider's in turn. "Eyes open. If Apex shows, we document. Phones out, no engagement." Tomas nodded reluctantly, his fists unclenching on the table. Riley sketched a quick route on a napkin, her pencil scratching softly, marking potential ambush points where the road narrowed through dense woods. Marco folded the documents carefully, tucking them into a waterproof pouch. "For Ellie, too," he said to Jax. A rare glimpse of the man beneath the veteran facade, his own losses mirroring the fight against the illness that shadowed them all. They loaded the last of Maria's belongings under a sky that promised clearing, the drizzle giving way to fitful sunbeams that warmed the wet earth, releasing the sharp scent of pine sap and mud. Engines roared to life in sequence, Jax's Harley first, that deep, resonant growl vibrating through the ground like a waking beast, followed by the others in harmonious thunder. Maria locked the house one final time, key turning with a click that echoed finality, her face a mask of quiet determination as she climbed into the truck's cab. The convoy pulled out, bikes flanking the truck like armored escorts, tires humming over potholes that jarred the bones. Jax rode point, wind whipping at his vest, the road's curve revealing glimpses of the old Apex plant, a skeletal frame of rusted beams and chain-link fencing, workers in hard hats swarming like ants under the morning light. Halfway through town, the tension snapped. A black SUV surged from a side street, cutting across their path with aggressive precision, forcing Jax to brake hard, gravel spraying in a gritty arc. Victor's vehicle blocked the intersection, his face visible through the tinted glass, jaw set, eyes locked forward as if daring them to react. Behind him, 2 Apex-branded pickups idled, doors opening to reveal burly men in company polos, clipboards in hand, gesturing toward Maria's truck. The air thickened with the acrid bite of idling diesel, horns blaring from a distant semi caught in the snarl. Jax killed his engine, the sudden silence amplifying the thud of his heart, and dismounted, boots hitting pavement with deliberate weight. The riders followed suit, forming a line across the road, leather creaking, faces etched with contained resolve. Victor stepped out, suit rumpled from the night, his polish frayed at the edges, tie askew, hair uncombed. "This ends now," he called, voice carrying over the murmur of gathering onlookers from the diner across the street. "Maria, the offer's off the table. Sell voluntarily or we'll condemn for safety violations. Your husband's accident, sloppy maintenance on his end." The lie landed like a slap, Maria's gasp audible from the cab, her door creaking open as she descended, papers clutched to her chest. Jax's hand twitched at his side, the old rage flickering, a veteran's instinct to charge. But he held, eyes narrowing on Victor's face. "We have proof," Jax said evenly, nodding to Riley who held up her phone, already recording. "Your signature. Cost cuts that killed him." The CEO's smirk faltered, a tremor in his stance as the workers hesitated, exchanging uneasy glances. Townsfolk emerged now, a waitress from the diner, Lena's cousin perhaps, whispering among themselves, phones lighting up the growing crowd. Victor's eyes darted, the moral suspense peaking in the standoff, his empire's facade cracking under the weight of truth, Jax's brotherhood a wall of quiet justice. "You think this changes anything?" Victor pressed, but his voice cracked, desperation seeping through. One of the workers stepped forward, hard hat in hand, rain from last night still dampening his boots. "Boss, I was there. The parts were bad. We all knew." The admission rippled, a fracture in the line, Victor's face paling as the man turned away, joining the onlookers. Jax felt the shift then, a deeper truth emerging, not just documents, but human fracture. Victor wasn't the monolith. He was a man haunted by choices, his arrogance a shield against the guilt of lives like Raoul's, like the veterans he'd indirectly discarded. "Walk away," Jack said, not with threat, but compassion laced in steel, stepping aside to clear the path. The CEO hesitated, rain-scented breeze ruffling his coat, then retreated to his SUV, the engine whining as he reversed, pickups following in hasty retreat. The road cleared, convoy reforming with a collective exhale, But Jax lingered, watching Victor's taillights fade. The emotional turn burned in him. Protection born of empathy, not enmity. Awakening the rider's code in full. Loyalty as redemption. Bridging the chasm between outcast and overlooked. As they rolled on, the sun breaking fully now, warming Jax's back, he glanced at Maria in the mirror. Her nod a silent thanks, tears glistening but unashamed. The isolation of his road had dissolved into this, a family forged in crisis, engines humming toward healing. Yet the horizon held shadows. Victor's flight felt like a cornered animal's, promising one final lash before surrender. Jax throttled forward, the custom heart of his Harley pulsing steady, carrying them through the moral storm toward whatever justice dawn might bring. The sun climbed higher as the convoy wound through the rolling hills beyond Willow Creek, its rays piercing the canopy of oaks like hesitant spotlights on a forgotten stage. Jax rode at the forefront, the Harley's custom engine thrumming beneath him. A steady, unspoken symphony that drowned out the fading echoes of the town's standoff. Wind tugged at his vest, carrying the fresh bite of sun-warmed earth and wildflowers. But his mind lingered on Victor's retreating form, the CEO's shoulders hunched in the rearview mirror of memory, a man unraveling thread by thread. The road curved gently, asphalt drying in patches, steam rising like ghosts from the night's rain, and Jax felt the weight of the morning settle into his bones. Not as burden, but as purpose forged in the quiet spaces between revs. Maria's truck rumbled behind, flanked by the riders' bikes, their formation a loose shield against the open expanse. Tomas rode close to the cab, his occasional glance back a vigilant scan of the horizon, while Marco and Riley held the rear, engines syncing in a low harmony that spoke of years unspoken. Jax's gloved hand flexed on the throttle, the leather creaking softly, a small ritual to steady the tremor of what-ifs. What if Victor doubled down, his empire's machinery grinding against the fragile truths in that shoebox? The moral suspense had peaked in the intersection's glare, but now, in the road's solitude, it simmered into something deeper. A confrontation not of fists, but of souls laid bare. They pulled into the new town by midday, a cluster of modest homes nestled against a lazy river, the air thick with the scent of blooming lilacs and distant mill smoke. Maria's rented cabin sat at the edge, its wraparound porch promising quiet evenings far from Apex's shadow. The group dismounted in the gravel drive, engines sighing to silence, the sudden hush broken only by the river's murmur and birdsong. Maria stepped down from the truck, her face flushed from the drive, eyes tracing the cabin's weathered siding, as if mapping a new chapter. "It's peaceful," she said, voice catching on the word, her hand lingering on the doorframe like an anchor. Jax nodded, unloading the first box, its cardboard damp from the morning's mist, the weight familiar in his arms. As they worked, the sun dappled the yard in shifting patterns, sweat beading on brows and tracing paths down necks. Thomas hauled the dresser with a grunt, muscles straining under his shirt, while Riley directed the placement of furniture with mechanic's precision, her laughter, a rare, soft sound, easing the air when a lamp teetered precariously. Marco unpacked the kitchen crates, stacking plates with deliberate care, his calloused hands gentle on the china Raoul had cherished. Jax paused by the porch steps, wiping his forehead with the back of his arm, and caught Maria watching him, her expression a mosaic of gratitude and something unspoken, recognition of the parallel paths they'd walked, losses carving similar hollows. Inside, as the last box thudded onto the floor, Maria pulled Jax aside into the sunlit living room, the space still echoing with emptiness. Dust motes swirled in the beams, catching on her words like fragile stars. Those papers. I sent copies to the DA before we left, and a reporter from the city paper, someone Raoul trusted. Her voice trembled, not with fear now, but resolve, her fingers twisting the edge of her sleeve. Jax leaned against the wall, the wood cool against his back, feeling the late revelation bloom in his chest. Victor wasn't just a mocker of machines. He was a mirror to Jax's own past. A man who'd traded empathy for assent, authorizing cuts that echoed the deployments Jax had survived, where lives were tallied like parts in a ledger. But where Victor had hardened into entitlement, Jax had softened into protection, the war's scars teaching him that true power lay in lifting, not crushing. "I saw it in his eyes back there," Jax murmured, his gaze drifting to the window where the riders bantered outside, Thomas tossing a rag to Marco with a grin. Guilt, buried deep, but there. Maybe this forces it out. Maria's hand found his arm, a light touch that held the warmth of family unblooded. "Like you forcing that engine to life, showing what's hidden." The words hung, a quiet bridge, awakening the full arc of Jax's evolution. From the isolated rider nursing solitary wounds, to this. A pillar in the Brotherhood's circle, compassion his throttle, loyalty his frame. By afternoon, the cabin took shape. Curtains hung, photos propped on shelves, the air filling with the scent of Maria's first meal on the new stove. Simple stew simmering with herbs from a tin. The riders gathered around the scarred pine table, bowls steaming, the clink of spoons, a rhythmic affirmation. Laughter broke through, Thomas recounting a botched repair from years back, his accent thickening with the tale, drawing chuckles that eased the day's edges. Jax sat at the end, soup untouched at first, his eyes tracing the faces around him. Marco's steady nod, Riley's subtle smile, Maria's hand steady on her spoon. The contained rage of the morning had yielded to this redemption, not vengeance, but vindication through unity. The Iron Riders a symbol of justice where law faltered, hearts beating beneath leather like engines tuned for endurance. As evening fell, painting the river in silvers and indigos, Victor's shadow resurfaced, not in confrontation, but surrender. A call came to Maria's phone, the screen lighting her face in the dim porch light. The DA's office. Apex was cooperating. An internal audit launched. Victor stepping down amid irregularities. Whispers of lawsuits, settlements for families like Raoul's. She lowered the phone, tears tracing silent paths down her cheeks, and Jax pulled her into a brief embrace, the hug rough with unspoken vows. The CEO's empire cracked, not by force, but by the light of truths refused too long. A late revelation that redefined the mocker as the mourned. His arrogance a facade for the isolation Jax had once known. The riders mounted up as stars pricked the sky, engines growling farewell, the custom heart of Jax's Harley pulsing with finality. Maria waved from the porch, her silhouette strong against the cabin's glow. A woman reborn in the margins. Jax throttled onto the road, the wind carrying the river's hush, his thoughts quieting to a single, lingering truth. Strength wasn't in the roar, but in the ride. Family forged in forgiveness. Loyalty the road that led home. Behind the engine's hum, compassion lingered, a silent justice that outlasted any storm. Subscribe for more stories of compassion, justice, and redemption. Thank you for watching the case of That Bike is Junk. See you in the next one.